Time catches up with all of us. One day you're young and vital and frisky as a lamb, and the very next you are getting junk mail from the AARP. And people your very own age are talking about their arthritis or their prostate problems. Time catches up with all of us. When we were young, time seemed to stretch out endlessly before us. But sometimes around our 40th birthday, we realize that our life is half over and time becomes an ever-increasing precious commodity. Who among us can ever forget those lines we learned as high school students? The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. Not all the tears of the world can change one line of it. There are opportunities that confront us every day that we must deal with in a timely fashion, or the moving finger will move on. The sands of time are running out for all of us. This is precisely the theme in 2 Timothy 4. We believe that they are the last recorded words of the Apostle Paul. They are written from Paul's prison cell in Rome. Paul is awaiting execution from the Roman emperor, and the date has already been set. So he writes this letter to young Timothy, whom he has left in charge of the church in far-off Ephesus. The relationship between Paul and Timothy is one of the warmest in all of biblical literature. Earlier in the letter, Paul calls Timothy my son in the faith. So, while Paul is passing the lonely hours of imprisonment, he writes to Timothy. He wants Timothy to come and be with him soon. He tells Timothy that he has a few errands for him before he comes to Rome. He's to stop back by Troas and pick up a few books so that Paul can feed his mind during the interminable months in prison. He wants Timothy to bring his cloak as well so that Paul can shield himself against the cold Roman winters. But most of all, Paul just wants to see Timothy himself. Do your best to come to me soon, he writes, and then just before he closes the letter, he repeats his request. Do your best to come before winter. Why before winter? Because when winter set in, the season of navigation in the Mediterranean Sea closed down. We read about the dangers of travel during the winter in Acts 27 when Paul was shipwrecked. If Timothy delays until winter, he will not make it before spring. And Paul has a premonition that he will not last until spring, for he writes, the time of my departure is at hand. We're never told how Timothy responds to Paul's last request, but I'd like to speculate that Timothy didn't wait a single day when he received Paul's letter. He hurriedly packs his things. He heads out to the seaport of Troas, finding when he can get on the first ship headed for the Roman peninsula. He hails a ship, lands in Italy. He hurries up the Appian Way and he finds Paul in his prison cell. He writes Paul's letters for him. He reads scripture to Paul and he accompanies Paul to his place of execution near the pyramid of Cestius. Before winter or never, there are some things in this life that must be done before winter or they will never be done at all. The season of winter will come and it will go, and the flowers of springtime will decorate the graves of our lost opportunities and perhaps even the graves of our dearest friends before winter or never. I like every season of the year. I grew up in North Carolina where there were 4 seasons, not 2 seasons as there are here in Arizona, hot and hotter, 4 seasons. I like wintertime. A few years ago, some friends of mine and I did a winter climb near Mount Rainier, Washington. We camped on a frozen lake, and we cooked dinner over a little camp stove as the sun went down. We looked up, and there was Mount Rainier being bathed in ever deeper colors of orange. Just before dark, I took a quick ski around the lake, my breath condensing in the cold air. I watched as the mountain faded in the evening light. The snow-laden Douglas firs were standing as sentinels at attention as night fell. I like wintertime, and I like springtime, with the crocus and the forsythia announcing the growth yet to come, proclaiming that life is stronger than death, that beauty is greater than ugliness. And I like summertime, my favorite season as a boy. I like summertime because in the evening, the men and women from our church would gather in our backyards, and the men would churn homemade ice cream, and the boys would lay out on the grass and look up at the stars and just imagine what the constellations were saying. And I like autumn with its mist and its haze, the steel blue afternoons when the sun shines through the oranges and the reds of the maple trees, the fields strewn with Queen Anne's Lake, the warm days, the cool nights. I love autumn. But how quickly autumn passes. It's the perfect parable of our lives. For tomorrow, the rain will fall and the wind will come, and it will strip the trees of their leaves, and they will stand barren. So every autumn I realize that the days flutter past us like foliage. Every November, as I look at the leaves on the ground, I realize that someday, far too soon, that I too will fall. So listen once again to the appeal of the Apostle Paul to young Timothy. Come before winter. What do those words suggest to you? You can't think of these words without doing a kind of inventory on your own life. How many times have we said to ourselves, I am going to do this. I am going to lose weight. I am going to have better eating habits. I'm going to give up this bad habit. And so we procrastinate. There is a procrastinator's creed. It goes something like this. I believe, number one, that if anything is worth doing, it would have been done already. Number two, I shall never move quickly, except to avoid more work or find excuses. 3, I will never rush into a job without a lifetime of consideration. Number 4, I shall meet all of my deadlines in proportion to the amount of bodily injury I could expect from missing them. Number 5, I firmly believe that tomorrow holds the possibilities for new technologies, astounding discoveries, and a reprieve from my obligations. 6, I truly believe that all deadlines are unreasonable, regardless of the amount of time given. 7, I shall never forget the probability of a miracle, though infinitesimally small, is not exactly 0. Number 8, if at first I don't succeed, then there's always next year. Number 9, I shall always decide not to decide, unless of course I decide to change my mind. Number 12, I know that the work cycle is not plan, start, finish, but wait, plan, plan. Well, here's a question you can noodle on today. What's the one thing in your life that you need to change? I'm not thinking about the most important things. That probably is just too hard for each of us, but just one thing, maybe small. One thing that will make you a better person that will make you feel better about yourself. One thing that will make God smile. If you'd like to make that change and would want somebody to pray about it with you, then shoot me an email, terryslicegood@gmail.com. Suppose for a moment, suppose that when Timothy received that letter from the Apostle Paul asking him to come before winter, that Timothy said to himself, yes, I will go and I will go immediately, but I do have some obligations. I promised the elders down at Miletus that I would come down and celebrate communion with them. And I promised the church at Colossae that I would come and ordain new elders for them. When Timothy has attended to the urgent matters in front of him, he heads for Troas to see when the first ship will be sailing for Italy. I can just see Timothy there at Troas asking the sailors, when does the next ship leave? And the sailors say to him, man, don't you know anything about the ways of the sea? The last ship sailed last week and will not be sailing again until next March. I can see it now. Timothy is on board the first ship in March, heading for Italy. When he lands in Italy, he hurries up to Rome. There he seeks out Paul's prison cell, only to be cursed and repulsed by the guard. Then he goes to the house of Claudia, the leader of the Roman church. He asks Claudia where Paul is. I can just hear Claudia now. Timothy, sit down. I must tell you that they beheaded Paul last December. His last words were for you, Timothy. Give my love to my son Timothy when he comes. When he comes. Dear God, how Timothy must have wished that he had come before winter. Come before winter. You just can't hear these words without thinking about life and its crisis moments. Evangelists like Billy Graham call them moments of decision. Whatever you might call them, we all know that there are times in our lives when God is knocking on the doors of our heart, asking us to change or asking us to do something different. And this passage suggests that if we don't answer those knocks on the door of our heart immediately, they will forever be gone. Don Sims was a member of my church in Portland, Oregon. Don and his wife, Kay, were deacons. They were the kind of people that Jesus had in mind when he said in his Sermon on the Mount, you are the salt of the earth. Kind, faithful, unassuming. If a task needed to be done in church, particularly a menial task, Don and Kay were the first to step up to the plate. Don particularly admired me. It's always humbling when other people admire us because we know ourselves too well to think that there's anything inside of us worth admiring. But he did. He never failed to tell me how much my sermons meant to him or how much my ministry meant to that church. Don had a bad ticker, and so he had to go in Providence Hospital for open heart surgery. He went in on Thursday about noon to go through all the tests. His surgery was scheduled for the next morning, Friday morning. I had a long day on Thursday filled with meetings and appointments. I had intended to go by the hospital before dinner to have prayer with Don, but I was already running late and it was 7 o'clock before I got home, and dinner with Barbara and the children was waiting. So by the time we finished dinner and finished clearing the table, it was 8:15. So I thought to myself, only 10 minutes to the hospital, maybe 10 minutes with Don and his family having prayer with him, 10 minutes home, 30 or 40 minutes. an hour at the very most. But I was tired. I knew that I should go, but I said, I'll just call him. So I picked up the phone and I called him and I asked him how his spirits were. He said, good. I told him, I'll come by in the morning after your surgery and see you. He said, that's great. And then I said, okay, bud, I'll be praying for you. And just before we hung up, he said, Terry, I love you. That's heavy. That's really heavy. The next morning, I went to the hospital to be with Kay and their children. Just as I arrived, the surgeon came into the waiting room. He had a grim look on his face. He took us off to another private room, and he told us that Don had died on the operating table. That happened more than 30 years ago, and I still feel guilt and regret that I didn't go that night. But I determined that from that day forward, whenever I possibly could, I would always try to go to the hospital and have prayer with someone before they face surgery. It hasn't always happened, but most times it has. Those visits I call my dying Sims visits. Once again, and for the final time, I repeat the words of the Apostle Paul, written to Timothy in far-off Ephesus, come before winter. We all know these words to be words of common sense, born of life's experience. Come before winter. Come before the snow lies deep in the fields and the meadow brook is turned to ice. Come before your resolution has chilled. Come before your life is over and you stand before God to give an account of all of the opportunities that God in His grace has given you. Come before winter. And to God our Creator, to Christ our Redeemer, and the Holy Spirit our Comforter, be glory and honor, dominion and power, today and forever. Amen.